You're about to watch the first ever in-person Chef Grace's Place podcast. A free thing you can do to help continue to improve the quality of this podcast is to like, share, and subscribe. For our first in-person podcast, we were lucky enough to go to the Space Life Sciences Center right outside the gates of the John F. Kennedy Space Center, where we met with Dr. Gary Stutte. Dr. Gary Stutte is a horticulturalist, plant physiologist, and space biologist. He worked for NASA for over 25 years. Thanks for having us, Gary. While we were there, we also got to see a really cool shuttle launch, so stick around to the end to see that. Most people think space food is just dehydrated food in a bag. So how have we gone from that to growing food there?
It's been a long and tortuous journey. So folks are correct that on the International Space Station, there's really not an opportunity for fresh food. There's not a refrigerator up there. There's not a microwave. There's not an oven. So the dehydrated food is put together and through the dietitians at Johnson Space Center to give a balanced variety of food. So it's by all accounts it's good. Well, so good.
It's good for you, but it's not.
It's good for you. They've gotten a lot better at flavor over the years. But on every mission that has gone up for a resupply, there tends to be fresh food, fresh apples, oranges, that can be eaten directly. And the astronauts and the crew seem to really, really like that because one, you get that fresh burst of flavor, you get those aromas, that, big word, all our olfactory senses, that taste and the smells and the, that feeling, of home. So over the course of many, many years, at least for NASA, has been how can we grow plants that crews can eat in space? That's required a couple of things. One is the horticulture, or how you grow the plant. How do you water it when water floats? How do you have it grow in the right direction when there's no up, when there's no down? How do you pollinate them when there's no bees up there? And so that has taken a series of experiments, which actually was only about less than 10 years ago when the NASA had their first approved crews, eating lettuce that were grown specifically on the International Space Station for consumption.
So lettuce was the first?
Lettuce was the first. So they made a salad. They made a salad. There was red leaf lettuce. There was some normal green leaf lettuce. And somewhere in one of those packs was, they made themselves some dressing.
So how does the plant know which way is up if there's no gravity?
Well, you have to figure out, once again, that's the horticulturist, is, you tricking it. Very much like, and I hate to, give, too much feelings to plants, but, people have a lot of different ways to solve the same problem. And so plants, they have this thing they call gravitropism, or they know which way is up and down based on gravity. So if a seed comes out and a shoot starts to go down, it'll turn around and go up, and a root will come up and it'll start to come down. They also have something called phototropism, or light. And you've seen that where if you get a plant in a window and it will turn and bend to the light. So that's what we do. We don't have the gravity to tell it which way is up, because it really makes no difference. But we can use light to orient it on which way we want the shoot to go and which way we want the root to go.
So you try to get a complete darkness where the roots are and light.
We try and get complete darkness. We try and just separate those two environments. Not so much for the light, although that is important, but as the roots is where we get the nutrients, and we provide the nutrients in the water. So if you water the plant, it's just going to float away. So we need to have some cover on it. We need to be able to contain it. We need to control the water and keep it in the root system. Because the funny thing about space is, if I take this coffee cup and, I throw it up and, the coffee hits, sets up, I'm going to have a bunch of water bubbles in my coffee cup floating here in front of me. So there's no falling down or going up. So, there's things we have to learn on controlling the water. So we need to keep the lid on it.
So if the water is just floating there underneath,
Yeah.
the roots, they still can suck up the water?
They do. There's lots of different ways that have been done, but basically you set up a little place where you have the roots are at and some soil-like substance. We call it arsenite, but it's something like the soil for the roots. And so those are packed in, and then the water goes through, and then the root takes the water off that little particle, runs up to the plant, out through the leaves, through the process of transpiration. And so, it's just evaporating water up through the leaves. And when it uses enough water, you turn on a little pump and give it a little more water. So we're using something where, water kind of sticks to stuff more than it doesn't stick to stuff.
Oh.
Yeah. So that's the thing we can play with.
So are we basically mimicking the cycles on Earth, the condensation? Are we collecting that and then putting it back?
That is the long-term goal for what would be called biological life support systems. And that's where really my interest, my passion, and what brought me down here. Because there are, so if the two of us sitting in here and we're talking and it's all going to be good, but after a while we'll get kind of tired and we'll get a little cranky and then we'll take a little nap.
Hungry.
Well, no, the first thing that will happen is we will asphyxiate ourselves because we have too much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. We will suffocate ourselves.
Oh, yeah, hypoxia.
And then if you can scrub that out,
Okay.
then the oxygen levels will start to go down, and then you'll pass out and not wake up. But there are ways to do that, physical and chemical ways to get rid of CO2 and produce oxygen. And then if we stay a little longer, we'll get pretty cranky because we're dehydrated, we're thirsty. If you give us water, then we need food. But there are ways to take care of 3 out of those 4, everything but food. But plants through this kind of amazing thing of this light that's coming in, and the green leaves through photosynthesis can take our waste CO2, produce oxygen. Transpiration, taking the dirty water, then the nutrients comes up through the leaves, it evaporates off the top, and we condense and make fresh water. And if we do the dials right, we produce food, a biological, sustainable life support system.
So by dirty water, you mean we're reusing the pee and poop from the astronauts?
Absolutely. This cup I'll be drinking for the next 3 years.
Yeah.
So it is, you'd have clean water going in.
Yeah.
Not so clean water comes out, but that water is not only urine, but we have wash water, you've taken showers, you sweat. I mean, there's just a lot of sources of water that can now be condensed. If it goes through the plant, it goes through the roots, they extract the nutrients out of that, run up to the top, and then it's what we call transfer or evaporation, but it's basically evaporating through the little holes on the top of the leaves, and it produces pure fresh water. And that's what you alluded to. That's the way it works outside. It worked this morning.
Because the Earth is just one big closed system.
It is mostly a closed system. We lose some stuff in, but yeah, it's in cycles.
Yeah.
And so transpiration goes up, it goes into the clouds, they get high enough in, the temperatures come, the water drops back down, it flows through, it dissolves all the nutrients that are in the soil and the litter of, wherever you're at. Plants take that up, evaporate it out, take the nutrients, go back up. We eat the food, we pee it, we poop it, we process it, and it recycles again.
So it seems like that we'll be able to do that on the space station, but how is it going to be different once we try to colonize Mars or the moon?
It is actually really challenging in space because you have a really small area.
Yeah.
And you have a lot of people.
Yeah.
I mean, up there can be 6 to 8 people. So having the biological, processing, just think how many trees we have out here, and we have algae in the water, and we have lawns, and I mean, there's just a lot of biology. So we can demonstrate that, but here on, and if we start moving, say on the space station, we can demonstrate that it's feasible. So a series of tests that were done, maybe 25 years ago here at Kennedy Space Center, established that it took, something about the size of, a large bathroom, 10 square meters, 5 square feet, would produce enough water for me or you, day in and day out. And
that's just one person.
That's just one person. And if you got to something about the size of a bedroom, like 10 by 10 bedroom, not even, yeah, that's about right. But a 10 by 10 bedroom would produce, remove the CO2 and generate enough oxygen for one of us. So if you had something that size, you get enough water for 4 to 5 people, enough oxygen for food, and if you do the dials right, it's about half the calories. Because assuming you grow something, usually about half the plant, I figure I throw away. Roots, stems, leaves, bad leaves on the outside, you chop things up, you
Is there any, I guess, moringa would be a plant you could eat all of it?
Yeah, things like moringa, you could eat all of it, which has really been an emphasis at NASA. And about the time I left and began working here as Synergy, was what we called minimally processed foods or salad crops. So, earlier you said lettuce, and you kind of rolled your eyes at lettuce. But what lettuce means is all of the time, all of the electricity, all of the water, all of the nutrients, all that energy that goes into that plant, 95% of that I can turn into food because I'm eating a whole plant, as opposed to something like wheat, where you think, okay, now I can make breads and pastas, and you being a pastry chef, well done. But on that you grow out the plant. Maybe 20% of that is the head. Then you have to shuck that all off.
Yeah.
Then you grind it, and then it goes down. So somewhere around, depending on how you process it, but let's say 75-80% of the plant is tossed into the compost pile.
So, the one that everyone talks about is the potato.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So,
I like potatoes.
Me too. And I found out recently when I started my garden that if you grow sweet potatoes, you can eat the greens from them.
Yes.
So that's like less waste.
Yep.
What kinds of potatoes we've been growing? We've been growing potatoes?
Well, yes, a lot of potatoes have been grown. A lot of potatoes were grown. There was in what we call the biomass production chamber, a really big chamber about 2 stories tall. Back in the late 90s, we ran for 418 days, so over a year, just growing potatoes. You'd take potatoes, you'd harvest part of it, replant, harvest, replant, harvest, replant.
Is that the most calorie dense plant that you can grow? Or?
No, it's not the most calorie dense. But what it does have is a very high, what we call harvest index, or how much of that you can eat. So about half that plant, and if we did things right, we could get 60 to 70% of that plant were calories. So you could eat the whole plant. Now something that would be calorie dense that we grew would say something like soybean, or you get peanuts, or things that have a lot of oil in them and fat. So you have more calories in that fat, but the amount of that plant you can eat is a lot less. So that's the balance that we have to think about when designing a food production or a life support system from the moon and Mars. Where do I get my calories? Where do I get my protein? Where do I get my fats and oils? Where do I get my phytonutrients? What's the balance? What makes sense to ship up on a rocket? What makes sense to grow? And that's all still very much a work in progress. But yeah, potatoes, won our yield derby for sure.
I saw when I was doing my research that you were trying to grow food in the Martian soil.
Yes. We were trying to grow these little seedlings, lettuce, in the Martian soil. And that was a really neat project from the university that we did in collaboration with the University of North Dakota. And what they were looking at is this little analog, because you have all of this soil, or what we call regolith, because technically it's not soil because it doesn't have organic matter in it. But this material it's available, it has a lot of nutrients, but they're not really available.
What if it doesn't have organic matter? What is it mostly made up of?
Oh, I mean, it doesn't have nitrogen in it. It doesn't have carbon on it, but it has, it has some potassium in it. It has some phosphorus in it. It has a lot of iron in it. So it has a lot of the micronutrients in it. So what we began doing is looking at how could we use a biological solution to turn this into something useful? Because if I planted a seed directly into that simulated regolith, they would germinate, but then they died. They germinate, then they die. They germinate, then they die. So we began using worms, a wormery or a vermiculture, which turned out was lots of fun. I learned a lot. So the scraps from this crew that was living in a chamber up there every 2 weeks, they'd take their table scraps and things that weren't done, and they'd throw it in a little wormery. And then we'd add in different amounts of this dirt or regolith from Mars, up to like 25% of it. And then the worms would go through, eat up the waste food. They'd eat up all the little particles, comes out the other end. They do it over and over and over. So you have a biological weathering. So those nutrients that were tied up on these little particles of Martian soil were now released and available to the plants. So we were able to take lettuce and, we went from nothing to where we were growing something. I mean, it's not where we want to be, but we went from nothing to something. So that was pretty exciting, actually.
So I guess in a sci-fi movie, that would be the terraforming.
That would absolutely be the terraforming. Throwing stuff out there, turning it into, something alive that grows.
That's pretty cool.
It actually is pretty cool.
It is pretty cool.
It is pretty cool. And I thought it was like, but it turns out worms are pretty good candidates for doing this kind of stuff. Because I didn't know it, I'm a plant guy, right? But when the worms, they make they lay their eggs, but then they go pretty much dormant. So they can manage high levels of radiation. They just stay there until the moisture shows up. So, you can take in a little vial, an awful lot of worm eggs, and then start them up. Once you get there, then they grow and multiply, and feed them your garbage.
So worms are used a lot in what they're calling regenerative farming now.
Yep.
But what they used to just call farming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right.
And you're doing a lot of work with your new company, Synergy.
Synergy, right.
Which maybe you could tell us a little bit about that.
Okay. Yeah, so a transition occurred in my perception. My background is originally as a professional horticulturist. I worked with what they called a pomologist, or fruits, apple, peaches, plums, and pears. So I was on the faculty at the University of Maryland. I was, teaching how to, prune apple trees, how to space them, how you manage those types of things. And we began seeing how the environment would affect those trees. And then the opportunity came to come down to Kennedy Space Center to work on that project I alluded to before, what we called the Breadboard project. And being a plant guy, I kind of thought that had something to do with bread.
I mean, I'm a pastry chef, so I'm thinking it has
Yeah,
something to do with
you're
bread.
thinking bread, right? But you got to remember that, NASA is an organization of engineers. And in the engineering world and the electronics world, a breadboard is a sort of a playground where you take parts and pieces and you put them together to see what works and how they work before you go on and start building prototypes and going into production. So it's like, the breadboard is like a giant Lego set of, putting different systems together to see how they work, which was super fun. And so about a decade, we began looking at a very large scale, like, at the time, about 4 layers in this facility that used to be a vacuum chamber for the Mercury and Gemini programs. Got outfitted with lights, hydroponic system. You could close the door and then start tracking photosynthesis, transpiration, and growth. So we did that for about a decade. And then after that, it's like, okay, we know what we can do here on Earth. What can we do in space? So very early on in the space station program, was able to have an experiment up there to look at some of those photosynthesis, transpiration, growth questions. And subsequently had a series of other experiments looking at plant microbe interactions. But in about 2011, right at the end of the shuttle program, I went to Europe on some funding from some European funding to help stand up a laboratory. And during that time, I traveled around and began looking at regenerative agriculture systems. I began looking at these things of indoor farms that were just showing up and vertical farms. And I'm saying, man, we can do all of these things. Perhaps I should go visit the places to see if I actually can do those things. So it's been about 18 months traveling around doing that. So when that time in Europe ended, I came back, and after a fairly short period, I said, I'm going to spend the rest of my time, taking these insights that we have for closed systems, biological solutions for very high food production, and apply it here on Earth. How can we take what we learned about recycling, reusing, high productivity, and use it here on this planet?
So what have we learned?
Stop me at any time. I babble on.
I'm not stopping you. So a lot of this stuff is indoor, right?
Right. Well, really about half of what I'm doing now is indoor and outdoor.
Indoor and outdoor.
Yep.
Mainly because of climate change, or?
Well, if you're outdoors, you can use the primary energy system for photosynthesis here on the planet is the sun.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we can control in things like a greenhouse, and you have available land, then you can go out, and then it makes a lot of sense to go out, use the sun for free, and use your resources to grow out. So you get, you had instead of, 1 acre or 3 acres or whatever you're doing, because the power for photosynthesis, it's not free, but it's coming from the sun. So you can adjust that, and you have to play with that. But then you start going to places where you're like in the inner city, and it starts. I say inner city. It started. One of the first ones here in the U.S. was up in Newark, Aero Farms, and then Bowery is up in Newark, which they have converted large warehouses, and inside those warehouses, because the land's not available for production, instead of going out, you go up. And so then we start substituting electric lighting sources and sole source lighting systems to grow plants indoors.
Does the cost of the energy to power the building cost more than producing it normally?
Well, it depends on where you're at.
Okay.
That is a very complex calculation, but generally, yes. Because depending upon the price of what your electricity is, and then what you are selling. So what you will find is that most of the indoor farms are using things that have a very quick turnover, like lettuce, because you can grow them very quickly. I can plant them, harvest them in 28 days, and sell all of it.
Yeah, and that's mostly the expensive stuff too, because
Yes,
going to go bad
it is
on the
expensive. It's a premium product. It typically has, no traditional pesticides on it. The insects are kept out of the building because they're not running around in the field. The contamination problems that come out of the field and transportation are low, and typically they're fresher and have a longer shelf life. Because if let's just take Newark as an example. If I'm harvesting in Newark in the morning, that can be in either the market, in the restaurant, or the store, or in the consumer's hands by that afternoon in New York City, in Philadelphia. Give it another day, you can get it down to Boston, you can get it over to the casinos on the shore. So it's not coming all the way across country. So there's a balance that is between, do you have your energy going in to produce the light for a local product, or do you have the energy to produce it remotely and then either fly it in or truck it in across country or fly it in from Latin America? So it's not a simple answer. I think I wish it was.
Indoor farming, how do they pollinate all the plants?
Then indoor farming, depending upon what is being grown.
Yeah.
So if you're doing things like we'd call leafy greens, if you have lettuces or basils or basils, if you have chives, or you have bok choy or any of those bitter greens, which do extremely well in there, you're just growing leaves. You don't need to pollinate them.
Yeah.
So you don't need to pollinate them. Where if you have a longer cycle where you're doing things like strawberries or tomatoes or peppers, it is some combination of people going around and with a little buzzer and pollinating and shaking the plants, releasing pollinating bees inside the plant area. But typically on the indoor farms, leafy greens rule the roost. And then you have the viney crops, the tomatoes, the peppers, the cucumbers that need that pollination. Strawberries tend to go into greenhouses.
So on the space station, assuming they're hand pollinating everything?
Yes.
No bees allowed?
Yeah. So the lettuce, they don't. But things with the, with
feather duster.
tomatoes, they come through. And one of the first experiments I was on, there were these little mustards they called, these little brassica rapid, but they're like a little mustard plant, and we were looking at seeds, and they needed pollinating. So we tried lots of things, like using a little toothbrush. There's some commercial pollinators that you go. Bzzz. Ultimately, we ended up with who knew you could get by these, the thorax of a bee, and we take these little what we call bee sticks, glue the back end of a bee onto a stick, and then act like a little bee and go around and pollinate the flowers.
I bet you got that on Amazon, huh?
Amazon didn't exist then.
No.
Amazon was only selling books at that time.
I can't believe you can buy that. This is hilarious.
Bee thoraxes.
Bee thorax.
Yep, they're cheap.
What do you do for a living? I sell bee thorax.
I sell bee thoraxes. I glue little bee thoraxes on them, little bee butts. Put them there on a stick,
yeah, that's great.
But that's what they're designed to do.
So, what do you think is another question about growing food on space? What do you do if a disease, like a plant disease, gets into the space station?
That is something that we worry about a lot.
Yeah.
Okay, so there are, various things that get done beforehand to minimize this. One is exclusion. There is a lot of control of what goes onto the space station. You have clean seeds, you have sterilized seeds, you take care of the sample. So you're not, willy-nilly just throwing things out. That's one. You got some exclusion. The second is, by planting things, sometimes it will be treating them with little fungicides or bactericides, but generally not very often. But let those grow up. So we try and exclude them. But they're human beings up there. And the microbiologists tell me everything is everywhere. And so, once it comes up, what we will find is keeping a very close eye on the control of the plant. Because typically, that when you have a plant growing healthy and strong, a disease can't compete with the plant. So you can just kind of run it through the cycle. And then one of the primary research efforts of Synergy has been for the past, we're going on 10 years now, is how you could use beneficial microorganisms around that root. So you inoculate them, so when the bad guys come, there's enough good guys in there that can block them, kill them, and prevent them from growing. So we have physical differences. We build a beneficial community in the root system. And then finally, you just keep a good eye on things, and you start seeing things getting out of the way, you pull it out and throw it in the trash. So you cull it. It's important not to keep around a sick plant as a pet. I'm going to make this better, I'm going to nurse this back to life. You start seeing something that looks diseased, you get it out of there. So
probably advice I need to take for my own garden.
Most people don't. Most people don't. Just I'm going to try this, I'm going to try that, and the next thing, this plant is sick, and then these plants are sick, and then you spend a fair amount of energy, and then this one dies, and then you don't have any tomatoes anymore.
Okay. Yep. Sorry.
Guys are coming up on 40 minutes, all right?
Cool. About the disease thing, I had a question, but I'm trying to remember what it is.
It'll come to you.
Disease. Oh. I'm not sure how to phrase this, but I was listening to something with your experiment with, it had something to do with the roots turning almost like not talking to each other, but interacting with the other stuff.
Right.
And then some stuff grew better and the other thing did not grow good.
Right. So So those are things that we've been looking at, have been those what we'd call biostimulants. So they're not really talking to each other. What we're doing is around all of the root system, there's something they call the mycorrhiza, but which is down in the soil. There's a lot of microbes. There are bacteria, and then there are fungi, and then there are all kinds of these little organisms that can form a relationship that's beneficial with the roots. So you have these deals that get cut between the plant kingdoms.
It's kind of like your gut.
Exactly like the gut. So the original synergy experiment, excuse me, from which the company takes its name, we were looking at this process called nitrogen fixation. So plants are very, very good at taking this pretty inert gas, carbon dioxide, in the presence of light and a bit of water, reducing that and turning that into oxygen and carbon. So they make carbon and sugars and all of those things. But they can't do anything with nitrogen, which is the bulk of our atmosphere. But there are some microorganisms that are very good at reducing those really stable nitrogens, breaking them down into things that they can use so they turn them into ammonias and nitrates, and so they can break those down. So we were looking at this symbiosis. Here's these plants, soybeans, beans, peas, lots of these things, legumes, the pulses, but mostly your beans. The roots will go in, and these bacteria will come in and start to infect it, and plant says friend or foe. And if it's a friend, it stops. It won't let it kill the plant, but it forms these, what we call little nodules down in there. And what happens there is, in these nodules, the bacteria produce nitrogen, so these plants are producing their own fertilizer, and in return, the plant is getting sugars and carbon to support the bacteria. So we have a beneficial life support system.
And that's part of when you first get into gardening.
Yeah.
You hear a lot about the three sisters.
That is exactly what the three sisters is all about. That is exactly what that is about, because you have maize or corn is a very heavy user of nitrogen. The beans can make their way up, they will support it, but they form this, they fix their own nitrogen so they can feed the plant. And then you have the squashes or the cucurbits that are, or the pumpkins, or whatever location you're at, that are then using that nitrogen. They're getting the increased aeration of that big old root system of the plant. They come up. So that is exactly what the three sisters are about.
So one thing I see in farming in America in general, and then in this indoor farming, is that it is all one plant, usually. Mm-hmm. So is there a way to incorporate this beneficial variety of plants to help each other and still be profitable?
Okay, so there's two parts to that. Can you grow those beneficially together? The answer to that is yes.
Okay.
Can you do that and make a profit? Then it gets a lot harder.
Okay.
So that's a different question. And if you can certainly do that if you're an individual, you're doing that as a homeowner or a small collective.
Yeah.
But when you start going to commercial production, so you've got scale where you're growing, an acre of hydroponic lettuce, or you've got, you're going up 3 stories of towers growing a plant. There is that routine that comes, you're harvesting every day, you're processing each day, you're running out of line each day. So that becomes the challenge of, I can do that, but can I afford to have a separate tomato line, a bean line, a lettuce line? Can I use the same equipment? Can I use the same packaging? Do they harvest the same time? It becomes, the cost of operation goes up. Now, whether that's a good thing or bad thing, I'm kind of the sense these, really large ones are going to be consolidating this, to more local, groups. So instead of having a full warehouse going, so perhaps you're in a warehouse, you have a floor dedicated to leafy greens. You have a floor dedicated to strawberries. You have a floor dedicated to like some specialty medicinal plants. So you can, isolate those production processes. Because you can think about it. Personally, I'm a disaster in the kitchen, because you start coming in and it's pretty easy if I'm going to go, start chopping up onions, But now I'm going to have to chop up tomatoes. Now I've got juicy stuff all over the place, and then I start chopping up something else. So now my countertop is a mess.
Well, that's why you save the tomatoes for last. It's all about the order.
Exactly. So, there is a lot of thought that has to go into that,
that process.
Processing. And then if you're growing, so let's say I have a lettuce, I'll harvest it 35 days after planting. But it might take 60 days to get the tomatoes off. It can take 52 days, I'm making that number up, for a pepper, but they're not all on the same schedule.
Yeah.
So commercially, operations tend to start out with a lot of different things because they think it's a good idea, and it is a good idea. But then they begin to consolidate the things that are working and which are profitable.
Are there any, there seem to be like a new advancement in AI every day. Are there any advancements that are notable right now that are making it easier?
Yes, and like anything I say is, this is changing so quick.
Anything
I say today is obsolete from yesterday.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, what AI is enabling is, the culling of lots of information, allowing, the defined protocols to be optimized for production, to reduce the inputs of cost, because I'm a horticulturist, so I like to grow plants, I like sustainability, but if you're not profitable, it's not a sustainable operation.
Yeah.
So that AI is allowing those trade-offs to be made profitably and effectively. And sort of a segue into an organization I've been deeply involved with. We call the Controlled Environment Agriculture Design Standards, or SEEDS. And so that SEEDS is a certification project for facilities, not just for a lamp or one piece, but for the overall facility to then go in and look at 7 different domains of sustainability. How well is it using its energy, its resources of water? How well is it, building community? Are you able to keep, hiring and staying into that community? Are they building a circular economy? How are they using artificial intelligence or AI and automation? What's that balance between, machine learning plus, human experience? How are they managing their waste flowing out? Are they collaborating, say, with carbon dioxide with a local brewery? Are they, there's that whole system to get a scorecard. Because once you go into, the systems are complex. And so trying to balance out, these trade-offs is what SEEDS is attempting to do.
That's pretty cool.
No, it really is. And it's a challenge because it's much easier to say, okay, I am getting more, sustainable because I have got a more efficient light that is used, giving out more light for less power going in. It's a good thing. I'm all for that.
Yeah.
I'm all for that. Or I've got water that I'm recycling that water. I'm saving 80% of that. I'm all for that. You're collecting, if you've got a greenhouse and you're collecting water off the top and recycling and reusing that. But how do those all fit together?
It sounds like this would also be good for like new housing being built.
It would.
Because there's so much like gray water and like...
Absolutely. Gray water, water processing. So, technically, towards the end of our large project in the biomass production chamber, which regrettably was canceled, the facility was put down, and to my understanding is a reef offshore now. But at the end of that, we had a closed system where while we were doing these potatoes, we were harvesting our potatoes, then the leaves and stems were putting in this, liquid composter. We called it a bioreactor, but that was extracting the nutrients going back to the plant. The water that was collected, we had a shower hooked up, so you could take a shower and use that gray water, feeding that back to the plant. So the biology would be able to use your soapy water, your gray water, your shower water. I mean, it would, work just fine for, human wastewater, but that required too much permitting to do.
Yeah, what is up with that? Like, I understand there's a lot of E. coli, like bad bacteria in poop, right?
Mm-hmm.
But most, like other animals, their poop is used as manure.
It is. Now, in most areas, raw manure is not allowed to be used. So it's got to be dried and processed, so you get these big bins and they get composted.
So it gets cooked, is what you're saying?
It pretty much gets cooked. it gets cooked, it gets dried, it gets, that's the whole idea of the composting, is it breaks down organic matter, but what it also does is kill those bacteria that are the pathogens.
So when you put it in a pile, it does heat up.
It gets, that's exactly what it does.
So to me, it doesn't make sense that we don't build with like food and the earth in mind. I don't know.
We will get there.
We'll get there.
I mean, we'll have to.
Yeah.
So one of the interesting calculations is, so if we're going to go to Mars for 3 years,
yeah.
So let's say you've got a group of 4. NASA has developed these, kind of baseline numbers of what you need, which is about a kilogram of oxygen a day per person. A little more CO2 needs to be removed because it's a little bit heavier. There's some carbon in it and a lot of water. But it adds up to, about 60 pounds a day. When you start thinking about, all the water you start using, 8 pounds a gallon, for a flush, to wash, to do your hair, to, wash the food, to chop the food, the amounts that's in the food, that's 95%. So, I mean, we use a lot of water that we don't even notice.
Yeah, I've always noticed, working on the airplane, that those toilets don't use any water, pretty much. They use suction.
They do suction. So yeah, there's certainly techniques that one can do to pull those down.
Yeah.
They're just not. And on the space station, they use a little vacuum as well. Poop gets sucked and dehydrated.
And uses manure or fertilizer.
It gets jettisoned.
Yeah. So one thing you said earlier when we were talking about eating on the space station was that there's no oven, there's no microwave. So are all the foods that they eat cold or room temperature? Whew. So when we get to Mars or the moon, they're
going to be excited. They're going
to be able to cook there or no?
Early ones, it will be tricky. See, the problem is it uses a lot of energy to heat up an oven.
It does.
And
does a microwave use less energy than an oven?
I don't know, but it's then on the station they start getting safety issues, heat issues, touch issues.
Yeah, you don't want to.
We don't want to do that. That's one of the reasons,
fire.
like light emitting diodes or LEDs are used in space stations, because the light bulbs, they're hot to the touch, they break. There's mercury in the fluorescent bulbs. So if you have something that's solid state, doesn't break, it's safe to the touch, they're cool to touch, that does a lot of tick marks for, saving space, because every time you have to put in you use one of those trays to get replacement light bulbs, that's a tray that doesn't have, clean underwear or food.
I mean, yeah, clean underwear and food are.
I mean, it's so you have those trade-offs, and you need a lot, because if on long haul flights, you know how much food people eat, you know how much food people waste.
Yes.
You know how much waste is produced by people.
Yeah.
And so, if, whether that is 10 pounds or 20 pounds or 30 pounds is kind of irrelevant that I take in every day. I'm going to have 10 pounds of either air, pee, or poop I've got to deal with.
Yeah.
And so it is either learn how to reuse it, recover it, or you're constantly resupplying it. Because ultimately, unless you're like a kid, it all passes through us. I mean, we might, gain a few pounds, lose a few pounds here or there, but it's, energy, calories, nutrients are in, calories, energy, nutrients come out. So that's why it's so imperative to come up with these biological waste systems. It's sort of fun, the idea of thinking 3 years, but if I've got 2 tons of.
Well, another question I have that is kind of a segue is, once we get to Mars or the Moon, have we been thinking about growing plants to build things out of?
Yes and no. We have been thinking not so much to grow, plants specifically as building materials, but we have looked a lot at what we call inedible biomasses. The leaves and stems. There's a lot of cellulose. There's a lot of material in there that's not digestible. Even after you're composting, you'll have, these long strands. What can you use those for? Can we compress those, pieces to make structures? Can we use those to, support a plant? Can we, process those in some way that, as technology develops, to begin using in a 3D printer? So how do we use that waste? So the mindset, in Gary's world is we don't really have any waste. We just have resources that need to be reused and reutilized. And we don't know how to do all of that now. But those cellulosic fibers that are in the waste of a tomato stem are not that unlike the cellulosic fibers that are sitting on that, paper pad in front of you, or the cellulosic fibers that are in, a piece of wood. It's just, how do you use it? How do you compress it? How do you find the technological solution to use this biological resource?
So, speaking of wood, that would take a really long time to grow.
Yes.
A tree. So, we think more about bamboo or maybe hemp for that.
Well, hemp, bamboo, those are, very good ones for structural.
Yeah.
But
you can eat bamboo.
You can eat the
guess.
bamboo shoots. You can, but then you're not really. Once you start eating the shoot, then
it's not going to be a bamboo.
And in fact, if I take this plant that's taking my CO2, I'm taking my oxygen, I'm adding water, and I'm adding energy. That's a lot of resources that went into growing that plant.
Yeah.
But it's not coming in to keep me alive. So it's competing with me. So that becomes, once again, this balance. What can be done versus what should be done. Do I really want something up there competing with me?
No.
If I can't eat, great, I've got 10 square feet of hemp growing, but I'm hungry.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you can't smoke it either.
Yeah, no. So we digress on that one.
Yeah, and you don't have any fire.
Yeah.
It's the space station.
Yeah, they try and limit fires up there.
Yeah. So is there anything that I left out that you want to talk about? Probably a lot.
Well, these discussions are really complex, and I really enjoyed it. I think the thing that I leave with is, when I started Synergy, I began working with a lot of growers, and then we were looking at indoor farms and lighting and nutrients and recovery and hydroponic systems, which it's just this stuff's not as easy as it looks. And so between taking that knowledge that we've learned of closed systems, what the requirements, what that real potential of a plants to get yield is something that NASA has been absolutely brilliant at doing. So now we've pushed the bookmark. I think before we started some of this work, we did not know the yields that was possible to have, a commercial hydroponic, facility. The lighting systems were driven by safety, but it was not possible to go build up because we didn't have the light systems. They just got too hot. So there's been some transformation in how we start thinking about food. And, on a global basis, the population is going to be going up for at least another 30 years. So these technologies are going to be a part of that solution. And, going to space, I love it. I'm working with some groups out of Latin America to use the unique environment of space to create some solutions to, an impending problem in Latin America. But if I only focus on the problem and stop dreaming about what I can do in space, on here, Moon, Mars, and beyond, I think it's very short-sighted to look at one
I
the
think
other.
they help each other.
They help each other. They feed each other.
Because it's like the closed system of the space station is small.
And
the
small.
Closed system of the Earth is big.
Is
so
larger.
It's a breadboard of Earth.
It's a breadboard, and I get asked a lot, aren't you trying to recreate Earth? And it's like, no, I'm not trying to recreate Mother Earth. I can't. Gaia is just absolutely, amazing and beautiful in and of herself. But what we are doing is taking those fundamental processes in biology and pushing those to the limits of what we can do to sustain ourselves as we move from being an Earth-based species to an interplanetary species.
One of the things that I find is it's hard to find this kind of education. Growing up wanting to be a chef, everything, it was kind of like the cooking part was really easy to find, right? Because everyone cooks. But I grew up in a suburb of New Jersey, and I didn't know any farmers.
Right.
I didn't know any, even with like what I do now, right? people like in aviation or in the space community, a lot of people that come up in it are only can dream of it because they know people who they have a
Right.
relative that is in it. So are there programs being rolled out now more so to help people get into this?
Yeah, I mean, NASA has a whole series of, education projects or STEM activities that, in trying to engage people. Many of the local space museums, the American Space Museum here in Titusville, has a very active, STEAM, science, technology, education, arts, math program. I know there is, a Stay Curious podcast to talk about all of the various aspects.
That's where I found you.
That's right, and it covers the whole aspects. But I would say generally it's really poor, hard to find, and somewhat exclusive because you've got to know where it's at. So I think it's one of those things that, myself as Synergy and some others have begun looking at how do we tell that story differently. Where does the food come from? How does it's set? It's people are afraid of their food now.
Do you get any? So when I was in high school, we took over the cafeteria, the culinary class.
Okay.
And it was fantastic. And it seemed like, everyone enjoyed it because the food was way better, because it was real food. It wasn't, they're trying to make these square pizza things count as vegetables.
I know, but I remember Square Pizza Day.
Yeah.
It was a red letter day.
Yeah. And it's just, all the kids were happy because they got real food in class. And actually, in high school, we were able to eat out for lunch. So a lot of the restaurants on the main street, that's how they got most of their business.
Right.
But the cafeteria food was terrible, and it was from big corporations that control the cafeteria food, because we don't really make the food in-house anymore. We just reheat it.
Yeah.
So do you see pushback from these big companies, just like we saw from trying to get soda out of vending machines and all that nonsense?
Well,
getting these programs in.
Absolutely. But, I will, let me reframe that question a little bit into my recent experience, during COVID. So I was doing some work with a not-for-profit over here in Orlando. I was growing fresh food and distributing those, and it was nice. And as during that period of time, the availability of produce got really, really low. Food lines, at least where I'm at, were longer than I've ever seen in my entire life. And I went on a period of about 6 weeks of going weekly to the food bank, and there were like 3 of them. What were they getting? Keeping a track of them, like the calories, what was in it. And the real challenge that became was on those, food banks, was the fresh food was too much. It was past its prime. In other words, what am I going to do with, the case of bananas that needed sold yesterday? I gave them all to neighbors, and we got bread and things. But on that consistent basis, many of the people that are engaged that need that food lack the resources on, 1, to store it. 2nd, the resources on where to cook it. I mean, it is really, really tough, to store and cook 50 pounds of potatoes when you're sharing a room with your 3 children and your mother-in-law, and you're working 2 jobs. And they lack the skill set on how to cook. It became, so this organization began then distributing, moving, where then they were giving out these pre-packed boxes of high salt, highly processed foods that were stable, because now they could be stored. They weren't, you open a can, they come in, the health problems were just, being, a plant guy, I didn't like it, but I understood how that worked. that distribution of food to that many people, fresh food requires some knowledge on how to use it, how to store it, and how to process it.
Yeah, I think.
I'm not sure I answered the question, but.
Yeah, I just think kind of like when I was a kid, right? The big change was people quitting smoking, right? So like you would go and have the assembly, and they'd show you all like the damaged lung and all that, and and then you go home and you tell your parents or your aunt and uncle, hey, stop smoking, stop smoking.
Yeah.
So I feel like if we can get those kinds of programs in by talking about where our food comes from and how food actually works, then we'll have a bright future.
Many of the indoor farms are doing that. They're building. You've got a premium product. You've got a premium product, so you need to build a premium audience. And in building that premium audience, it's like, tasty lettuce is your gateway food to fresh production.
I don't know about lettuce for third graders. Maybe some strawberries or something.
Yeah, strawberries, fresh strawberries. Fresh lettuce can be good, but
I love lettuce. I rolled my eyes with lettuce because I'm having a really hard time growing it right now.
I know, it's not as easy as it sounds.
Yeah.
It's not as easy as it looks.
It's supposed to be like a head of lettuce, and it looks like it's arugula or flopped over.
Well, it's probably a little too hot. Not enough light.
Well, it is Florida. So.
It is Florida. Yeah. This
like
is not the natural habitat to try and grow lettuce.
Yeah. But
no, I think that's been covered. We've covered a lot of territory here.
Yeah. Thanks for inviting me to
here at the Space Life Science Laboratory. It's a really unique laboratory. It's right at the gates of Kennedy Space Center. I mean, we literally have the fence. We're going to go stand by it and watch a launch here in just a few minutes.
Yeah, I'm so excited.
And so it is, this biological, space biology and applying the, horticulture here on Earth, does produce an incredible amount of opportunity to solve some of the problems that we're just going to be facing. We don't have to like it, but they're coming, whether we like it or not.
And if any of our listeners want to get in touch with you, how can they do that?
So there are two ways. One, I would encourage them to go to the website Dr. Stutte, DrStutte.com, and sign up for our newsletter. And then the company Synergy has synrge.com, has links to get in contact with me, the work that we've done, the partnerships that we've developed. But either one of those ways will get to me.
Okay. I'll make sure that they're in the description.
Okay.
So thanks for watching, everyone, and we'll see you next time on Chef Grace's Place.
Thank you.
Cool. That was awesome.
Thank you. That was fun.
I'm so excited to see your shuttle launch, too.
Here it comes. This is the best part of it.